to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon. This back here, that's Bernard. He's my October co-host. And today we wanted to share with you our top 8 horror recommendations because 'tis the season. I make one of these videos every year, but this year I wanted to try to do different books that I haven't necessarily talked about before. Now there are definitely going to be some in here that I have talked about, but I wanted to take some of the regular players out and put some different ones in. So this year I think I've got a more sort of eclectic range of different genres, because if this was to be my favorite horror novels, they'd all be haunted house / ghost stories. So there are a few of those in here, but we've added some more genres just to give just more for everyone to pick from. If my glasses look crooked, it's because they are. So let's just get on into this. In no particular order, we're going to start now with 20th Century Ghosts by Joe Hill. Joe Hill is Stephen King's son, but honestly at this point he's a master in his own right. He's written a handful of novels and I think two, I think, short story collections, and this is one of those. Short stories are one of my favorite ways to consume horror. I love the punch that it can pack in such a short amount of time. Stephen King's short stories are some of my favorite things that he writes, and Joe Hill's great at it too. This book is excellent. If you love a good, scary short story that will keep you up at night, definitely recommend 20th Century Ghost. Next up, this is actually a new one to me this year. Earlier in the fall, probably September, late August, mid-September, somewhere around there, I thought to myself that maybe I would reread Bram Stoker's Dracula this year. But I ended up not doing that, and instead I ended up reading Carmilla by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. And as we all know, or as some of us know, Bram Stoker's Dracula is kind of the origin of the modern day vampire story. You know, all the vampire stories we know, they kind of all evolved from there. But what I learned not too long ago actually is that Bram Stoker was actually inspired by this book. This one came first, and this is kind of considered one of the very first ever vampire stories, Carmilla. And what is interesting is, now knowing this, anytime I watch any sort of vampire related content, like my husband and I, we just started rewatching HBO's True Blood, and in there's a hotel called the Hotel Carmilla. So now knowing about this lovely lady vampire, I see her all over in places I had never noticed her before. So, and plus earlier this year, or earlier this month when I was reading it, my sister called, she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I am reading a lesbian vampire story from the 1800s. How often do you get to say that sentence? Not very often. So yeah, it's the story of Carmilla, the vampire, and I won't say much more than that because it's like a 75-page story. It's very small, so I don't want to ruin anything, but it's definitely worth a read, especially if you kind of want to jump in and try some classic horror. 1872, I think, yeah. And it's easy to read. It's not too, you know, I know some people kind of keep their distance from classics thinking it's difficult to read, but this one definitely is not. Next up, we have a Canadian author that's kind of become one of my favorites recently. I've read both of his books and really loved them a lot. Now, I don't know if you would classify this as full-on horror, but let me tell you, it scared the crap out of me. And this is Ian Reid and Foe. Ian put out another book that recently got made into a Netflix movie, and I did a book talk on the book when I read it, and then I did a video on the movie when it came out, and that's I'm Thinking of Ending Things. So I loved that. As soon as this came out, first of all, the cover's so beautiful. I love that cover. It's one of my favorite book covers. Anyway, this book is one that's just filled with dread. Basically, it's a man and a woman. They're married. They live kind of in the middle of nowhere, and they get a visitor. and they never get visitors, not all the way out there. And from there, things go completely crazy, and it kept me on the edge of my seat the whole time. I remember reading, your whole body fills up with dread as you read it, because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going on. And I was terrified until the end. So that's fell. Oh, next up, I love this book too. From this author, I've read 2 of her books, and as I sat down to film this, I kept going back and forth between which one I wanted to add to this list. I've done book talks on both of them, and it was a tough call, but in the end I went with The Invited by Jennifer McMahon. The other book of hers that I've read is The Drowning Kind, which I also loved and is also very, very spooky. But this one kind of fits into the haunted house genre, which you know I love. But this looks at sort of the question of what if you didn't move into or buy a haunted house, but what if you built one? And I just thought that was such a genius idea. It was the kind of idea that as I was reading it, I was like, why didn't I think of that? I wish I had written this. It's one of those kind of books for me. And I thought it was just such a great idea. And yeah, it's a married couple. They've got a bit of a nest egg. They decide they're going to build their own home, and they build a haunted house. And there's just so much going on aside from that. I think it's great. I love it. Oh, next up, you guys. I know I said I was going to try to put in books that I didn't talk about too much in here, but nope, that's not the case. For this one, this is It Will Just Be Us by Jo Kaplan. I love this book so much. It's a haunted house story. I read it back at the beginning of this year. I got it for Christmas and I loved it. This book scared me so much. It truly scared me. And if you want a good haunted house story that I feel like takes it even a step further in terms of being just chilling and scary, this is definitely it. A woman goes back home to her family home. Her sister's pregnant, and the house is, and has always been, but when she goes back, she's just tormented by this house, and it gets dark, and I loved it. I loved every second of it. Next up, we have another classic, not quite as old as Carmela, but definitely a classic as well, and this is Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. This is another one that just fills you with dread. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about, or if you've read the story. If you haven't read the story and you've only seen the movie, I would still definitely recommend this book. It's about this couple who get the chance to move into a very elite upscale apartment building that there's always a really, really long wait for. And once they move in, things start going terribly, terribly wrong. And I'm just gonna leave it at that, because you can't even get into it without getting all the way into it. And if you're not familiar with that story at all, what a treat you're in for, because it is wild. All right, grabbing for books here. Okay, next up, I didn't know if I was gonna put this one in or not, because I enjoyed it, but I don't know. I enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed it. I don't know if this is one of my favorites, but I think this could be a lot of people's favorites. I'll word it like that. And this is The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. The reason I picked this up is on the cover. It says Tremblay's personal best, it's that good. And that's a quote from Stephen King, who I just adore. So I was like, okay, Stephen King, you got me, I'll read it. And I mean, it's scary. The way I feel about this is I feel like the premise is so strong, and then it kind of veers off in another direction, and I'm like, not bad, but I would have preferred it stuck to this sort of original premise. And basically it's a family, a mom and dad and a little kid, and they're at a cabin. You know, they're kind of on a little vacation. They're at a cabin, and all of a sudden a group of people show up, 3 people, and they force their way into the house and take the family hostage. And I always find home invasion, home intrusion? I don't know. Home invasion stories is so scary, just because like that's so realistic. That could happen. But then it goes kind of off in another direction where you're like, well, that's not going to happen. So it wasn't as scary for me. But I know a lot of people love it. I hear so many good things about Paul Tremblay. I can't wait to read more from him. So not my #1 favorite, but it might be yours. So definitely give it a shot. And then finally, oh, this is just another sort of classic. This is Ghost Story by Peter Straub. And I read this a couple of years ago. I made a video a couple of years ago where, or not one whole video, but one year, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, I thought to myself, okay, I'm gonna Google like scariest books of all time, buy a bunch of them, and then do book talks for them throughout October. Maybe that was 2018, I'm not sure. The years are all blurring together at this point. And anyway, this book, Ghost Story, came up so often on so many different lists that I thought, okay, I've got to check this out. And basically, so the blurb here, this also has a little quote from Stephen King. It says, "The terror just mounts and mounts." And that's true. This book is about a group of older gentlemen who get together every year to tell each other stories about the worst things they've ever done. Kind of like a cleansing session to get it off their chests. And that's all I'm going to say about this, because it's so good. It's so good. If you love scary stories, you will love it. And if you've already read it, or if you've read any of these, please let me know what you thought. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm going to get going now, but thank you so much for watching, and I will be back again real soon with another book talk video. Bye, guys.